Thank you, Sadia. My name is Jean Muntz, and I am a member of the Wild Ones organization, Northern Kane County chapter. Wild Ones is an organization dedicated to promoting the use of native plants. In case you haven't figured that out yet, we have launched a local initiative called Start in Your Yard to reach out to area homeowners who wish to transition to using more natives in their yards. And in support of our mission, we have partnered with the great Gail Borden Library to sponsor a community read of an important new book called Nature's Best Hope, An Approach to Conservation That Starts in Your Yard by Douglas Ptolemy. The book can be obtained by checking it out at the library, or it is available for a reduced price at the Arabica Cafe or Al's Creamery. If you go to our website, startinyouryard.com, info about this initiative and the opportunity to register for more free virtual book discussions about this book, and also presentations like the one today related to gardening with natives, is available. These can be accessed by going to the Gail Borden Public Library website as well. On these sites, you will also see links to a video that was done by Dr. Ptolemy, as well as links to all the previous presentations that have been given in this series. Wild Ones of Northern Kane County programs are open to the public, and our next program is this one that you see listed here, next Thursday. Here are some more upcoming programs. And as you see, when we get to the warmer months, we will be taking actual garden tours. Wild Ones sponsors an annual native plant sale. The first two dates listed are for members, and the third date, the 5th, the May 21, is open to the public and will be conducted with COVID protocols for safety. This includes an option to become a Wild Ones member and order plants at the same time. Here you see a certificate of participation that's issued upon completion of each presentation. There'll be one issued today. These will be redeemable at the native plant sale in May. And without further ado, let's get to the program. Trish Beckjord, our presenter today, chose to become a landscape architect in 1993 after a successful career in healthcare. Her motivation was to help save and improve the quality of our wild places and do something of lasting value that spoke to her personally. Since then, her work has helped many develop an appreciation for the unique beauty of our native plants and the critical importance of including them in our home gardens and public spaces. Trish loved finding places for Illinois native plants in her own yard and was constantly captivated by the life they brought to her gardens. At last count, she had enjoyed the beauty of more than 70 species in her small yard. In 2014, Trish installed her own rain garden and will share her experience of the process. Also, while in grad school, Trish learned to appreciate the value of having a visual dictionary as a design reference. So you'll leave this talk today with lots of rain garden images to help you build your own dictionary, along with a lot of helpful references. And here's a statement from Trish. As the climate crisis comes upon us, it is more and more important that we all learn to think sustainably about all of our actions. Our individual acts and what we demand or expect of our public and personal gardens can all contribute to creating a better world for our children and all the life around us. Your participation in the Start in Your Yard initiative shows that you care. Thank you, she said. So now I will ask Trish, who's a mother member, founder member of our local chapter, Wild Ones chapter, and she's appearing on the internet all the way from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today. Thank you, Trish.
Thank you, Jean. It's great to be here. It's nice and sunny here as well. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for taking the time to share with us this morning, this program. It's great for me to be able to come back and share some information with you about this. Rain gardens are a great tool and really great, really important. So as Jean said, I'm going to be talking about both the kind of do's and don'ts, things to be aware of when you construct a rain garden, as well as giving you a lot of images of what a rain garden can look like. That's the visual dictionary that I talk about that I think is so important. And then I'll show you at the end a number of resources that I've accumulated, and you will have those made available to you after the talk as a handout and a plant list. So you'll have a lot of information at the end of this to kind of really help you get started. So in terms of rain gardens and wetlands, you'll find that we're probably going to spend most of our time talking about rain gardens as opposed to wetlands. You'll begin to see why as we kind of move through this. I've got this first section of the talk where I'm going to go through all the rain garden examples, and then we'll stop for questions. So if you have questions at that point, we'll go over them. Then we'll come back and I'll share kind of some slides of my building my own rain garden and kind of what that process was like and the references, and then we'll have another opportunity for questions as well. So historically, just with a little bit of background, one of the things that happens with water is that it always flows downhill, and it always, in the past, has flown downhill after it has infiltrated. So it has soaked into the ground, then moves underground and comes out and supplies water to wetlands after it has been cooled and cleansed. And it's historically was a very kind of stable system because of all of the landscape opportunities for infiltration with woods and prairies and things like that. This is a sketch from Conservation Design Forum, what is now ECT, part of ECT. And you'll see that one of the things that happens, these are all as we started to build on this natural landscape. You can imagine these are all houses and buildings. Rather than infiltrating water, rather than allowing water to soak in, we removed all those places. And we actually, water either evaporated or it rolled downhill. And that's kind of where we find ourselves today with all of that building. And so here we are. This is kind of our landscape that we find ourselves in. This is Elgin, as you'll see. And one of the things that you'll see here is that what we've done is, of course, we've created a lot of opportunity for hard surface. There's roads, there's driveways, there's roofs, where water doesn't soak in. And so what happens is we've got what's called a stormwater system now, not a rainwater system, but a stormwater system that actually gets water away from our buildings, as it should, so that the buildings don't flood or have water problems. But then what happens is these drains kind of go into larger and larger pipes, and then water is accumulated from a lot of different places and flows out into our rivers. And you will see along the Fox River, I'm sure I've seen them from where I lived in St. Charles, and always wanted to map the number of places where stormwater just dumps directly into the Fox. Now, this is problematic for a number of reasons. One, that in the summer, for example, all those surfaces get very hot, so you're dumping hot water into the river. You're also picking up a lot of soil, a lot of grease, oil, contaminants from road surfaces, you're also dumping those in to the river. And so you're doing a lot by accumulating that runoff and creating a very erosive force as well. We're doing a lot to kind of really decrease the quality of the water quality of the Fox River. And so what we've done is we have set up a situation where water flows over land rather than soaking in and dumps straight into a river or a wetland. And then we are expecting that wetland to be the recharge. But the wetland is the wetland because all of these soils are wet. So it actually doesn't serve as a very good recharge situation. It can, through the plants, help to moderate some of these problem contaminants, but you're really creating very degraded systems. So wetlands, although we have thought initially that they could manage this, really is not the best way and doesn't have an opportunity. If you remember the aerial photo I just showed of Elgin, there aren't a lot of wetlands around to even try to set up this system with. So as the water dumps, if not into the Fox, into some of our smaller streams, we get a lot of erosive force because it's been collected from smaller and smaller pipes into a larger one. So you see things like this. Or it gets even worse, and sometimes you'll have road washouts. You've got undercutting of banks. People who live along creeks and streams sometimes find they're losing property to this erosion. And then we come back and we try to protect with just stone. So a lot of places will just hard armor the banks of these situations because we're accumulating water from upstream and moving downstream. And so it becomes very problematic as far as fixing a problem locally because you haven't fixed it upstream as well. So it's really one of the reasons that rain gardens are so important, because rain gardens can start at the upstream end, wherever you are in your yard, whatever water comes off of your roof and your rain garden, you can start to collect that on your own property and allow that water to sit and soak into the ground and infiltrate. So you are, by creating a rain garden, starting to get back to that original hydrologic pattern that really replenished the aquifers and kept water clean, and supported our wetlands in a very positive way. So you have, this is from Maplewood, Minnesota, and that's one of the references and resources that we'll talk about in a little bit later. But by collecting water, so there's a downspout here that collects to this rain garden, and there's another downspout here. By collecting this water here and allowing it to infiltrate, less water is going into a pipe that goes to a collector pipe that goes to a lake or stream. So we've got cleaner lakes and streams. We're filtering by moving this water through the soil, so we're helping to absorb and clean root nutrients, and we're soaking that water in. So we are reducing the strain on our rivers and streams and on our stormwater systems, and we are treating water as the resource it is. Rainwater is a resource. It shouldn't be considered just a problem. This is another cross-section of a rain garden. So we talk about, one of the things that we talk about is the way we describe rain gardens is they are low depressions in the ground. You'll see that here by the house, so here's a downspout that would move water into a rain garden to allow it to infiltrate or soak in. And we're going to talk a little bit about the depth of rain gardens, about how big it should be, whether or not you should amend the soils, and where you should place it. But one of the things to stress really with this, a lot of people sometimes think that if you have a wet place in your yard, like if you've got a downhill location in your yard, that's a great place for a rain garden. Actually, it's not the best place for a rain garden, because if a place is wet, if that soil is wet, then it's already soaked up as much as it can, and so it can't soak up any more water. So if you have a wet place in your yard, it's a great opportunity to create a native garden using native plants that like to have wet feet. And in fact, is probably a better place to use to try to plant some of the plants that we often recommend for rain gardens, because we think rain gardens are always wet. But as point of fact, once this rainstorm is over with and all this water soaks in, a rain garden is actually quite dry. So if you can imagine in summer and fall, when you don't have a lot of rain necessarily, the soils are very dry. And so if you plant only plants that like to have wet feet, as we talk about, then they're going to be stressed in those times because it's not the kind of normal hydrologic regime that they are used to having. So here's another example, another way to see a rain garden that shows there's a downspout here in the house. It collects water in a rain barrel, but then that rain barrel overflows because it captures too much water. So that water moves down a channel and into the rain garden. Now, typically what will happen is if this is really dry and you get a rain event, the water will, this is the top of soil in the rain garden versus the top of soil on the banks. And this is usually about 6 inches. The recommendation is 6 to 9 inches. Now water will soak in here. This will get moist and it will start to soak in, soak in further. So that really what you can collect is the amount of water in this 6-inch area that extends over the entire area of the rain garden. And that's one of the ways, that's one of the numbers that you need to use when you think about how to size your rain garden that we'll talk about. Sometimes rain gardens, which is something that you're not going to need to worry about, but sometimes rain gardens, if they are put in larger commercial spaces, might have a drain down here because they are being used to hold and collect rainwater and have to be sized for a particular rain event by regulation. So they might have to be sized to hold the amount of water that would happen from a 100-year storm event. And then you have to move that water out within 24 to 48 to 72 hours because you want to be prepared for the next rainwater event, next storm event. So it's the same kind of thinking for a residential rain garden. Rain gardens don't hold water more than about 48 hours. They should not hold water more than 48 hours. And because of that, they also are not mosquito traps. You don't grow mosquitoes, if you will, in your rain garden because there isn't standing water for a long enough period of time for that to happen. So this just starts to show you what people think of in terms of, well, isn't a rain garden wet? Isn't it a wetland? This is my only wetland slide, actually. We could do a whole talk on wetlands. But I just wanted you to see there are a whole number of different wetlands, some of which have open water, like this emergent marsh or hemi-marsh. There are also things such as the sedge meadow, where the soils are moist. Sometimes you might have open spots of water, or you might even have just a wet prairie, which is considered a wetland because those soils are of a certain type, and they are typically moist throughout the season. These are not rain gardens. This is more the idea, particularly the wet prairie, more the idea if you have a wet area in your yard that you want to plant with natives, you can certainly do that and create a really beautiful garden. So really what we're talking about is a rain garden that holds water and then dries out. And this is from the Missouri Botanic Garden. This is just a series of questions, a kind of decision tree, if you will, to go through. You'll have this reference too in your list of references. So what this just says, okay, let's say, so you're going to do a rain garden. You want to build a rain garden. Is the site a woodland? Now, in this decision tree, if you have a woodland, the answer is work wonders with woodlands. Because to try to dig out a rain garden, the space for a rain garden, might be more destructive of the roots of the trees than you want to do. But there are other alternatives with what to do in woodlands where you can create maybe places for some water to soak in, and you can plant certain plants, but it's not the best place for a rain garden. We'll talk a little bit about a percolation test. So if, okay, I don't have a woodland to worry about, does the soil drain well? Well, we do the percolation test. No, it doesn't. So there are ways that you can conquer soils if you have heavy clay soils that are compacted. Now, I will tell you that clay soils still absorb water. It's not that they don't absorb water. They might absorb water a little bit more slowly, so that if you're digging in your yard and you have clay soils, the only thing that I would recommend that you do is when you get the area dug out, that you really dig in some compost, some leaf compost, to help loosen the soil to improve percolation. Is the site on a gentle or moderate slope? So you don't want to put a rain garden on a steep slope. So no, I've got a pretty steep slope, like here in Pittsburgh, for example, there's lots of steep slopes. And so those wouldn't be the best locations for rain gardens typically either, because one of the things that's important is to give that space for water to sit so that it can soak in. So you always want a flat bottom and as wide an area, as large an area as you can, according to the area that you're collecting water from, that's flat, so the water can sit there and soak in. So if you've got a gentle or moderate slope, then you're okay and ready to move on to thinking more about how to design your rain garden. There are some tips that you have to remember for building rain gardens that are pretty important. One is that you want to make sure that your rain garden is located more than 10 feet from the building foundation. Now, why is that? Well, if we are holding a place here for water to soak in and it's soaking in here, and you're right up next to your house or within 3 feet of your house, what's going to happen? The water's going to go right into your foundation drainage. And so you might, all of a sudden your sump pump's going to work a lot harder, or all of a sudden you're going to need a sump pump. So you want to keep it further away than 10 feet about from your house. You also don't want to build a rain garden on top of a septic system, of course. Now, that maybe would make total sense to anybody who's thinking about this, but you want to stay away from the septic system, and you want to stay away from any steep slopes. So anything that's about 15% or more. And of course, anytime you dig, you want to check your utilities so you know where your utilities are. And then, as we talked about, the percolation rate. Now, one of the things that this rain garden shows, this diagram shows, is it shows 3 different zones for plants. And this is one of the ways that we tend to talk about rain gardens when we think about plants. So there's the bottom of the rain garden, which is the flat area that is going to hold the most water and allow it to soak in. That's going to be right down here. And that's what this graphic is calling zone 1. This is actually from this old house. So there's lots of information on the website to get information about rain gardens. Then it's going to kind of slowly slope up to more the top of the garden. That's calling zone 2 for plants that can tolerate occasional standing water. And then zone 3 for drier conditions. This is a little bit more complicated in thinking about a rain garden that I think you need to be, and you'll see that as I kind of talk about things and show you more examples. But I think one of the way that I have found it's easiest to think about a rain garden is water. As water comes into this from a rain event, it's going to fill up most of this area. And rain gardens are typically designed to collect all of the water, if you can, from about a 1-inch storm, 1 inch of rain in 24 hours. And that is most of our rain events. So the goal is to capture most of the rain from our most common rain events. If it rains more, you're not designing a rain garden to capture all of the rain that would fall only once every 50 years or once every 100 years, a 50-year or 100-year storm event. You don't need to try to do that. You just need to have an outlet where when this rain garden fills up, it has a place to go that's appropriate. And we'll talk a little bit more about outlets as well. Soil percolation test is pretty easy to do. I will tell you, when I did my rain garden, I didn't do a percolation test. We'll talk about why when I get to that, but it's a very easy thing to do. You just can, all you have to do is dig a hole that's about 6 inches deep and 6 inches is in diameter. The depth is about how deep your rain garden is going to be. And 6 inches in diameter just makes it easy to kind of figure out. And you want to make sure you're doing this test when all the surrounding soil is saturated. So you don't want it to be dry, because you want to understand how much water or how fast the water is going to be absorbed when all the surrounding ground is wet. So you fill up the hole with water, you let that soak in, you make sure the ground around it is saturated. So, but you're doing that by filling the hole that you've dug. Once it's drained, then you fill it to the top again, and you check to see if it's been absorbed in 24 hours. And if the water's gone, you're really pretty good to go. 48 hours maximum. So the minimum percolation rate suitable for a rain garden, 25 inches per hour. You don't have to be exact about this. Again, you want to make sure that water is absorbed within 24 to 48 hours, because you don't want standing water. You want to make sure that the water is going to soak in. So we've talked about locating your rain garden properly. It should be more than 10 feet from the house. It shouldn't be on top of a septic system, and in fact should be away from the septic system. You want to think about how much water is going to come to the rain garden in a typical storm event. We'll talk a little bit about that. Understand your soil's infiltration rate and adjust your topsoil by adding some compost. If you've got clay, don't add sand, thinking that that's going to help infiltration. Adding sand can be pretty tricky, and if you don't add enough sand, what you create is cement. And so then you really have a problem. So just, even with heavy clay soils, just kind of dig in some leaf mulch. And then, as I'm emphasizing here, planning for overflow in a major rain event. So this is a picture of a rain garden that I got on the DIY network. So when I did some searching for images, it's a little bit hard to tell to me, but I think that the inlet where the water is going to come in is here. Now, I'm not sure of that. It looks a little bit like you're going up here, but I think that's just the angle of the photographer. And so they have planned for an outlet for once this fills up here. And the way you plan for your outlet is you want to make sure that this point of overflow is just slightly lower than your point of inflow here. And I'll talk a little bit and point that out again in some more images as well. Here's another way to look at it. And this is from that same website, where, so there's the downspout, the water is covered with, they've got a little plastic pipe that they've put in here to cover the inlet. Water comes in here. They've dug out an area that is fairly flat down here at the bottom. They've taken the soil that they've dug and they've kind of piled it up around the sides. So this is where it's wettest, a little bit drier here and driest up on the top of the slope. Feather the slope back down on the outsides into the yard. And then this overflow point is should be allowing for 6 inches of water to sit here. So it should be, this point should be 6 inches higher, and then this should be slightly higher yet, so that the water can flow into here. But as it fills up with too much water, water outflows here as opposed to backflowing in this way. There's some rain garden lingo that might be helpful for you to know. People kind of tend to throw these terms around. Maybe some of you have heard of these. There's rain gardens, bioswales, vegetated swales, bioretention swales. They're in some ways the same thing. A rain garden is a place to hold water, to allow water to soak in and infiltrate. A bioswale or a vegetated swale is the same thing, as is a bioretention swale. It is an elongated rain garden. So this is a huge scale. This is a much larger scale. This is a smaller of the same, and this is to a certain extent, you've probably seen this. If this is a driveway and there's a swale here between a yard and the street, that's an area that collects water. And so you can actually plant that as well. It's moving water a little bit and would have a drain in here where if water gets up to a certain point, it will go into that drain. But these are swales that are just larger areas that kind of tend to move water, although all of this plant material slows it down and allows it to also soak in. And then this is at the Morton Arboretum, and this is probably more what I would call a bioretention swale. It's just more engineered. So for those of you who are in Chicago, if you've been to the Morton Arboretum, you've seen these. This is a wonderful system. It is all permeable pavement, or much of the parking lot is permeable pavement, which rainwater will soak in through that. The water that does not soak in through that will drain off and into this swale on the surface. And then under here, there is actually a pipe that moves this water along and overflows ultimately into the lake. Although anecdotally, I think that this system does so well in handling stormwater, that overflow is actually yet to have happened. So it's really a wonderful system. Here are different examples of rain gardens from the city of Maplewood, Minnesota. Maplewood, if you did a search for rain gardens, you'll find a lot of information from Maplewood. They started a retrofit. They had very sandy soils in this area, and they started a retrofit because they wanted to sheet drain rainwater from the street into rain gardens. So they talked with all the homeowners along these streets and said, would you be willing to put in a rain garden and we'll help you with it? And it ended up being a great demonstration project. All the homeowners really liked it. You'll see some of these do not have necessarily all native plants. This is a shade garden that has some astilbe in it. But that it really helped the pressure on the stormwater management system, and it became so popular, the use of rain gardens has really spread in Maplewood, and Maplewood has become a really great resource. There are a couple of things just to point out here in your own yard whenever you use whenever you install a rain garden. Think about how you want to create the edges, even if that, now you'll see here, they didn't plant this up here, they allowed turf to come down to this edge. And they've created a cut edge all along this rain garden to really give it definition, which I think helps make something look deliberate, and it helps kind of make something look neat and tidy, which is something that a lot of people really care about. It's kind of one of those things that Joan Nassauer calls cues to care. This is a great example of a series of rain gardens that are planted. And again, I think this would benefit if it had a cut bed edge, but this has been planted pretty formally, mostly with native plants, but not all. I think this is actually a daylily, although it's a little hard for me to tell. But they can be really very attractive. And you can see here are the curb cuts where water is being collected off the street. So this is mostly a drainage system for rainwater on the streets, as opposed to catching rainwater from a downspout to catch water from part of your roof. One of the reasons that it's important to use native plants, there are several different reasons to use native plants in rain gardens, but certainly one is all of the information that Doug talks about in his book in terms of all the interrelationships between pollinators and insects and the birds who feed on them, for example, and the other small mammals that feed on them, the relationships that those have built up with native plants. So that you want to, in creating a rain garden, it can not only be a thing of beauty, but can it actually also create and support life. It can offer food. And that's one of the reasons that it's very important to use native plants. Doug talks about, it seems in a study that was presented in the Smithsonian, that you need approximately about 70% of your yard should be in native plants. Now that can be in trees, it doesn't have to be in a lot of gardens like this, but 70% in order to provide enough food to support, I think it was one nest of chickadees. So it's very, very important that we participate and we think about kind of the Start in Your Yard initiative here in Elgin, which I think is just so great, and we use native plants. One of the final reasons to use native plants is a lot of these natives, like a lot of the native grasses and sedges in particular, have very fibrous root systems. And that fibrous root system is what helps keep carbon in the soil, and it helps keep the soil loose over time. Because as that carbon is used, soils tend to settle and compact, and then they lose their infiltration. So when you plant non-native plants, or if you're planting cultivars, you are losing potentially some of that beneficial effect of having those fibrous roots. Here are just some other examples and places that you can put a rain garden. So this is an extension in a sidewalk. This is again a place where it's being drained down into a parking lot. So this is a long swale. This is a smaller rain garden that is, water is coming in here, and it's been edged with stone. And then here are some examples. So now we're getting down to the residential scale. Blue Thumb is another great resource. They've got some really nice videos, I think, for you to take a look at. But this is a great example that I found where you can see here. So they're starting with this downspout here, and they've come over and they've actually made it copper. They've pulled another downspout from more on the front of the house, and they've moved that back under the fence. And then those are going to discharge into this stone channel, kind of a dry stone channel. It's going to come down into this rain garden. So here's a nice flat space that's for rain to settle. And then I would hazard a guess that somewhere over here, I don't know if we can see it as well in the next slide, but somewhere here there is the overflow that water would flow out into the yard if this ever were to overflow. The one thing that you want to make sure of is that you don't position your overflow so that it goes right into your neighbor's yard. That's really the key issue that you want to be careful of. And it's okay to put boulders around for edging and in the middle for decorative kind of locations. This is again the dry stone channel kind of leading water into the rain garden. They have they've put a liner in here. That is one thing that will help water from soaking in here right up next to the house, and kind of continuing to move it down toward the rain garden where they want it to soak in. And here's the kind of the finished location, and you can see it looks actually like maybe in here or in here is where it's going to soak out into this area of the yard. And then these are the finished pictures of it, where it's really created a lovely garden. You can create a naturalized rain garden that looks more like a natural community, but you can also create very formally designed rain gardens as well. This was one that I thought was interesting. Again, in order to kind of save area, if you will, you can see here the sides are not kind of that nice kind of gentle edge that are planted, is that the space for this rain garden that's been created is one where the water flows in here and then flows into here. And what the rain garden consists of is the flat area for infiltration with these, excuse me, stepping stones that have put in here so you can actually step into the rain garden to get in, and they're kind of a design element as well as creating access for maintenance. This is one for that was actually featured in Midwest Living, and is one that is a channel, more of a channel rain garden. So here's how the water was moved down to a little splash pad. There was some height here where they were able to splash it down in, and then this is all sedges, and so the rain garden kind of comes down into here. And again, it's kind of longer and narrower, but flat at the bottom. So again, a rain garden can be in all sorts of different shapes. This one, when I found it, I thought, I'm not sure this is 10 feet away from the house. So I would be a little bit cautious about this, but it's one of the reasons that I wanted to show it. You can see here, again, here's the downspout, and that is covered up and then moves out into here. And then water probably exits here and it comes out and into the driveway. And so this distance could be 10 feet away and could be fine. And so again, I thought it was a great thing to show. Number one, it looks like this is a service berry, so you can plant trees in rain gardens. You can plant shrubs, and they can just be very attractive spaces, even in your front yard. This is one from Sipley Elementary School in Woodridge. This also is another one that I wanted to point out so that as you see these, as you go out and about and you see these things, you can think, is that a rain garden? And do I like it or not like it? It's interesting. This is all very flat, and the curb here is what provides the edge for water. Now, as I look at this, I have a little bit of a hard time understanding it, I will say, because this is probably about 8 feet max. No, maybe 4 feet. Take that back, 4 feet max. And so this is way too close to the building. Now, I will say that when I worked for Conservation Design Forum, we did design rain gardens that were closest to the edges of the building. But what we did, and what you need to realize, is that there is probably here a barrier underground, a water barrier underground that comes over and, sorry, I keep hitting the mouse, that comes down and under the rain garden so that water cannot move laterally to the edge of the building. So sometimes there are engineering strategies for when you place a rain garden near a building like this that you just can't tell by looking at this. The other thing that I will say, it's interesting too, I can't tell if this is an inlet or an outlet. This to me is a little bit strange because it almost looks like it doesn't allow a lot of time for water to sit before it overflows. So I would have taken this and built it up maybe about this high, unless the intent is to try to capture water from here and move it this way. So sometimes pictures are a little bit hard to understand. Here's just a nice rain garden next to a patio that has some decorative stone. It's just a low, nice area. It's planted with a lot of sedges and iris. You can see iris here, sedges. And this is probably palm sedge, which is a great sedge to use for a rain garden. Here's one that's moved away from the house. This again is picking up water from the street and moving it in this way. One of the things with rain gardens that I've noticed, certainly in my own rain garden, the wettest part of the rain garden is certainly the bottom where it accumulates. But even in a small rain event, the wettest part of the rain garden is going to be right where the water comes in. Because what might happen is that it's going to come in and it's going to infiltrate here, and it's the water, the rain event is never going to be large enough to get water even over to this section of the rain garden. So the way the water moves in and then moves out is also another thing to think about in terms of planting your plant placement. I thought this was interesting because this was probably done as seed. You can see that it's very long. This is probably more what I would call a swale, although it's been called a rain garden here. And this is another where it's just hard. You know, you've got kind of an indistinct edge here that kind of starts to get a little hazy. And in your own garden, I think it would maybe be hard to have this be constantly a cut edge. But in your own garden, I think it would be better to do that because it just cleans it up and helps you identify kind of edges. This is an interesting edge that I thought was kind of intriguing. Again, here's where the water is collected, and it looks almost like this has been deliberately marked as a channel. I couldn't find any other pictures of this. And it comes down a slope and into the rain garden. And then I don't know where it overflows to, but I would hazard a guess that somewhere in here, there is a standpipe that once the water starts to get up to the top of this, close to the top of this, it overflows. It may be that somehow or another it overflows into here. I'm not totally sure. It's hard to tell what this garden is. It's interesting to me because it doesn't have a lot of lower sedges or lower grasses filling in here. This would be a great place potentially to put some taller shrubs or a small tree. So I think there's more that could be done with this garden. But it's interesting to me again that it is created somewhat more formally by this hard edge and then creating this wide flat area. Here's another one that has a straight edge, but actually where the rain garden is back here. This is kind of, it's very small. It's collecting water from here. I'm not quite sure where the pipe comes out, but I expect that it's coming out over into here somewhere. And then the water, there's a slight slope that goes down that it fills up and then water moves down to here, and that this would be the outlet. You don't have to have much of a hill at all to move water, either from the pipe, the downspout, into the rain garden, or to move water from kind of over the edge, no more than about a 3% slope, which is if you dropped 1 foot in 30 feet, you'd have about a 3% slope. So 1 foot in 50 feet is a 2% slope. So just sometimes you can't even tell how steep the slope is. Here's one where it looks like this is probably a rain barrel. It's an interesting looking rain barrel. I've never seen one like this. I would assume if it is a rain barrel, it has a screen on the top of it, so mosquitoes aren't getting in here. Or maybe this is just something that collects water in the rain event and then moves it out right away into this channel. And it looks like this is where the rain is settling kind of down in here. And maybe it also collects water from here down and kind of moves in. It looks like it needs to be planted a little bit more heavily, but I do like the look of the decorative stone. Here's another one. I hope that in this yard, it looks like this is where the turf will be, and then there's a lot more planting that still has to happen here. But it's interesting to see how the water is collecting and moving down into here. And this is probably the standpipe where once the water gets up to a certain height, it will go into there as far as overflow, as opposed to overflow anywhere else in the yard. Here's another one. Again, capturing water off the street. We certainly have an issue, as does Blue Thumb, which is in Minnesota, with salt. And I don't have a list of plants that I can tell you that are salt tolerant, unfortunately. So I think that in the spring, one of the things, if there's not a lot of spring rain, you can wash salt through. You can't get salt out of our wetlands and our waterways once it goes in. But in a rain garden, spring rains, washing it through or watering your rain garden thoroughly will help wash that salt through so that the long-term effects aren't there. Here's another example, very artful placing of a dry stone channel. But again, I'd love to see this when it is planted more, because I assume there's going to be more planting here. There's a lot of bare soil here that doesn't need to be here, and that ultimately actually needs to be planted again in order for those fibrous roots to keep the soil open with kind of added carbon each year. You will find some recommendations that you add mulch to a rain garden each year to help with that carbon, but really all you need are the native plants. You don't have to mulch, and sometimes the mulch just kind of floats anyway, so mulch can be kind of problematic. But again, rain coming down this downspout in, coming in here, and moving into here. Now this one, again, the area that is flat for infiltration is somewhat small. So you're going to probably you'll maybe get filled up from here to here in this rain garden. But it's a nice gentle slope, so it's nice and easy to plant all along the slope. So that's one thing to think about. And then this edging creates a nice defined edge. Here's a really firm defined edge. This was interesting because I can't tell where there's an outlet. And maybe it's that it doesn't require an outlet and doesn't overflow, although I kind of hazard a guess that's not the case. I don't know if there would be a notch back here, for example, and if this is still their own yard. So it's a very definite hard edge, looks very kind of formal. And so again, another example of what a rain garden can look like. You want to think about how you get the water to the rain garden. I've shown you lots of images of dry stone channels. Here's another image where you can use brick or pavers, for example, to move stone, to move water. And this water will move along here more easily than it will through a smaller stone like what I've been showing you, which would tend to slow the water down a little bit more. So if you're trying to get water a longer distance, you might want to not impede its flow, and so to think about using something like this to create a channel to get it to the rain garden if the rain garden is further away. Sometimes it's nice to, I wanted to show you this because sometimes you might be out and you'll see something like this and now know, oh, that's a rain garden. And I thought this was so interesting. It's a very, I think, a very nice design. Again, that it's probably a fairly new, it's probably spring for sure, a fairly new planting, but you can tell how this has been graded so that the water flows down into here. This will fill up and then it overflows into here once the water reaches a certain level. And then this is where the rain garden is. So there's lots of ways to move water in that can be really interesting. You can also just use kind of a U channel, if you will. So the water will come down from a downspout and will move along this channel onto this stone splash pad and into this stone, cobbled stone. And then here's a place you can walk over it. I like the look of this. It's interesting. I like the look of this. I would prefer probably more native plants or grasses. And it looks like here is the overflow over here. Getting water from your downspout to the rain garden, you can also use a rain chain, is another thing, and then kind of coming down to a splash pad on larger cobbles. Rain chains can be really attractive and are wonderful even here in our cold winters. And here's an example from Jean shared this wonderful photo from her yard showing her rain garden. Here she's got a beautiful rain garden, and here this is a button bush. Here's spice bush. We're looking under an alternate leaf dogwood. There's artwork out here in the garden. And this is really beautiful. This is mostly all sedges. And Jean can correct me when we get to questions and answers, but Jean collects all the water from a section of her roof down a rain chain through a U channel, kind of comes down through this chimney tile and into this dry stone bed, kind of comes over and then moves down into the rain garden out here. And it's really lovely. I've been there and seen it in person, and it's really a lovely setting. You can also not only use rain chains, but collect water into a rain barrel and then have the rain barrel overflow into a channel like this to move it out into a rain garden. So there are a number of different ways that you can really create rain gardens and design rain gardens with a lot of different elements. And I'll stop here. I think that's my stopping slide. Oh, here's my stopping slide. If you're ever down at U of I down in Champaign, check out the Eikenberry Commons. Terry Ewan Design Associates. Terry's a wonderful landscape architecture designer, has a wonderful firm that does really great work. This is a rain garden that is designed to collect all the water off the roof. So the rain garden is all down in here. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And you would walk by this and never know that that's what it was. I was down there visiting with a friend and I was explaining it all and they were like, oh, really? So it can be really fun. So I'll stop there and we'll see if there are questions to go over at this point.
Yeah, Trish, there was one from Sandy early on asking if sedges close to sewer lines were appropriate. And I'm not sure.
I've never heard of sedges being a problem for sewer lines in the same way, perhaps, that you're thinking of if you've got a willow tree next to a sewer line, where the roots of the willow can perhaps get in or break a sewer line or something like that. So I don't think it would be a problem for sedges at all.
And then Jean Eakins had would a rain garden, can you use buried downspouts coming into a rain garden? And I think after she asked that, you showed us a couple examples of buried downspouts.
Yeah, you absolutely can. What you have to be careful of is what's the height, what's the level of the bottom of the buried spout. So what's this level, if you're looking at the spout in cross section, what's this level? And what is that relative to the 6 inches and then the outflow? So maybe from here to here is your 6 inches that's going to fill up with water to soak in. And then here is your outflow. So it's lower than the bottom of your inflow, if that makes sense. But otherwise, yes, you can bury your downspout for sure. But it's just that relationship that you need to make sure of, because if the bottom of the inside of the downspout that's buried is lower than where the outflow would be, when the rain garden starts to fill up, the water would just go back into the inflow.
Oh yeah, very good thought about that. Yeah, and then there was a comment about Aurora has installed something, either swales, rain gardens, or vegetated.
Downtown?
Yeah, and I haven't seen those. I don't. This person said it was downtown.
Aurora has installed some rain gardens downtown. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I have some pictures of those. I should have included one. They're using curb cuts. It's been kind of a retrofit that they've tried to do, and they're planted mostly with non-natives, but they seem to be working quite successfully. And those are, I think, 3 or I don't know, maybe they're even 5 years old now. I've lost track.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a good thing. It's a good thing to go down and see. And it's an example of how certainly you can mix in non-native plants with native plants as well. It's just kind of, we need to kind of, I think it's important for people to understand that connection that Doug Ptolemy keeps talking about between what plants feed what insects, which feed what birds and smaller mammals and things like that.
And then I know you're aware of the southwest area neighborhood of Elgin is an area that has the older fashioned sewer system that is combined. And so they did, in the city, with the help of a grant, I do believe, put in 22 bioswales in that neighborhood that are the style you showed us, where they collect rushing water out of the street. They're not
Yes,
coming from a downspout, but
yes,
they're along the parkway
yes,
system of each
yes.
yard, and one is next to Lowry School in that
Oh,
neighborhood.
I don't know much about that program. I know that it has been done, and I don't know, one of the things that I think is so interesting about those kinds of projects, I think they're very important, but to give support to the property owners, who, if it's going to be their responsibility to take care of them, or to make sure there's maintenance support from the city if it's not the property owner's responsibility to care for them, and to kind of keep track of them as they progress for a few years. Because like any garden, one of the things that I wanted to remember to say is that a rain garden is just like any garden. It needs to be managed, it needs to be weeded if weeds get into it. So you have to keep an eye on it. It's not something that you plant and then let go.
Yeah, that's definitely been an issue with them. And there are people that would like to see if that can't be addressed and recovered a bit in that
Yes,
neighborhood. But
yes.
yeah, Trish, that was the extent of the questions asked. So if you can show us some about your rain garden, uh, that would be
Sure.
fun to see.
Okay, okay. Be happy to do that. Okay, so my rain garden, a lot of fanfare, but it's not that fancy. Um, when I moved into my house, wait a minute, got to make sure my computer's working here. Come on. When I moved into my house, all I had was yard and a lawn and nothing, and some yews in the front. And I started, and in the back, I had, this looks very sad, I know. I had this back deck. It didn't look quite like this when I moved in. I was in the process of kind of transforming it. I think this is the 2013. Yeah, this is a 2013 slide. I had this paver patio that was here, and you can tell that it's higher. You had to slope down. There was a slope down to the yard, and then there was this wooden framing around it. And I had I can't, I'm sorry, I block it on the ornamental tree, um, that's now a problem. Oh, calorie pear. I had a
Oh,
calorie pear here that was struck by lightning and split several years after I moved in. My neighbor had this big, huge eastern red cedar, and so I had this little red cedar seedling that started, and I thought, oh, nice, I'll let that grow. So, and I was starting to put in sedges, and I had put back here, I had thought, well, this is a narrow place, but I'll put some taller, maybe some sunflowers and some things like that back in here. I had some little blue stem here. This was kind of an earlier in the year shot. Well, this is what I ended up with. And I thought, well, this is never going to do. And one of the reasons I'll point out that this is Rudbeckia triloba. brown-eyed Susan, and I had planted some along the fence along the back of the yard. And I will never recommend this plant to anybody unless you have lots of room, because it goes everywhere. It's a ready self-seeder. It's short-lived. I love all the golden flowers. It looks a little bit like black-eyed Susan, but it seeds all over the place. I was constantly pulling out brown-eyed Susan seedlings, both in the front and the back. So I said, well, I want to make a rain garden, and I want to take this patio out, and it's time for me to redo my deck. And I actually don't like this eastern red cedar here. And I love the fact that little blue stem loves to grow up in the sand between the cracks of the pavers, but it's, kind of just a mess right now, and I need to do something with it. So I said that what I was going to do was collect the water that comes from this part of the roof down. So what we've got is there's a roof line here, and the water from this section of the roof goes to that downspout. This section of the roof comes down here to another downspout that actually goes out here. There's another downspout that comes here, a downspout here, and a downspout here. So I said, okay, I'm going to take the water from this section of the roof. So when I was trying to calculate what square footage, I just kind of walked it. I could get up on the roof and measure it. But I think I just eyeballed it. So I just said, well, it's going to be this rectangle right here. And so I just eyeballed it from the ground in order to figure out square footage. And we took and reused, one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to reuse all that paver material for various things. So I cut way back on the deck and just made a 5-foot landing, and then created a sidewalk step down into an area that this is before the bluestone was laid, but I had a bluestone patio out here. And then right next to this over here is the rain garden, and all of the area in between is kind of the upland. So you'll see here, how am I going to get the water from that downspout into the rain garden? Because I wanted to, move it away. And I already knew that the water flowed generally down to this corner. In heavy rain events, it seemed like water came from this neighbor and kind of flowed along here, kind of went under the fence, flowed along there. So, and if you were out front, there was a slight slope downhill this way. So I knew that my overflow point had to go somewhere over in this general area, because the water was eventually going to go there. So the fellow that I had help me, because I couldn't do this myself, one of the things that we did is we took some of the paver stones and made a sidewalk into part of the backyard. And then we used more of it to make a channel to come down into the rain garden. And then we just took some extra stones, some extra pavers to kind of hide this attachment to the downspout. So it wasn't very wide. I didn't make it very wide. And you'll see when he dug this out, he dug a pretty straight side here. So I had a rain garden, and that was fine with me because I didn't have a lot of room over on this side to kind of lay the slope back. I could have done it more on this side, but I didn't feel I needed to. I could have done maybe a little bit more here. And you can see here, I kind of started to do that. But I had a nice big round flat area for water to sit and infiltrate. And when you can see here with that paver channel, you see how it's just a slight slope. And then as it gets toward the rain garden, it kind of slants down even further. He buried it a little bit further, so it kind of empties down into here. I took in this, having dug this out, I took and put compost in here before I planted, kind of turned over compost. I didn't do a lot of intensive rototilling or anything. I just did it with a shovel. And then all of this was just going to get planted with kind of upland plants. So there was going to be a whole upland garden between the rain garden and around this edge of the rain garden and where the patio was going to be. The other thing that was kind of interesting about this to me was, so you can see if you put water here, water starts to kind of come in. And that's why I mentioned this seemed to be the place that was wettest. It seemed that, down here, it didn't get it had to rain quite a bit in order to get water down to here. This was all the sand and gravel base for that patio. So this was a pretty dry, well-draining area. So I could really put in some plants that were drier. So I was thinking a lot about what would work here, would be really successful, and then what would be down in here that would be wet. And this just gives you that close up to show kind of how this was constructed. We didn't put anything in between here to make these impermeable. It's just that they are what's called butt tight and compacted under there. And so then I started planting. Well, actually, before I started planting, the day after this was constructed or dug out, we had a huge rainfall. And I was so excited that I could go out and check my rain garden, and it was working. I did not do, the other thing that I did not do was I didn't do a soil percolation test, because I knew that my soils were pretty good. I knew I actually, when I calculated, I went through the calculations of how big my rain garden needed to be in order to accommodate water from a 1-inch rain event from that roof area. And it was going to be too big. So I said, well, I'm just going to do it smaller and make sure that this area here, this little area here, is slightly lower than this area here or the surrounding area, so that if there's an overflow that needs to happen, it flows here and it flows out to the backyard. I could have put a dry channel there, but I did not, because this is the way you kind of entered into the backyard, was down through here. These are some of the plants that I've put back there. So if we concentrate mostly on what I'm calling the moist/dry bottom zone, because it was very clear to me that this dried out and stayed dry. And so there would be times in the summer, it was easy enough for me to do, but this is not the point of a rain garden, that I would go out and I would put the hose in the rain garden, and I'd run the hose long enough to fill up the rain garden. So that the plants that I had put there, I had put swamp or rose milkweed, I had put blue flag iris, I had put marsh blazing star, I had put initially Rydell's goldenrod, which is a wetter species. I had put in winged loosestrife. I had seen that actually in the Midwest Ground Covers garden, and it seemed to be being very successful. And I thought, well, it should do fine in a rain garden. I had put in common rush, and I had put in sedges and tufted hairgrass. And so other ones that I added over time, what happened was that I kept losing the swamp milkweed. Sorry, my cat's jumping up on my lap. I kept losing the swamp milkweed. The iris hung on, but it never seemed to flourish. The liatris did okay. And then the penstemon from my upper garden came down into here and seemed to do fine. The prairie drop seed seemed to do fine. The turtle head, which I added later, by the time that I had moved, had done fine and was lasting. In fact, the lobelia was hanging on, but had actually, I found it growing better over near the overflow outlet of my rain barrel, interestingly enough, which was not someplace that I had planted it. It was across on the other side of the yard. The Rydell's goldenrod did well, moved out into the garden. So that is a pretty adaptable plant. It didn't seem to be overwhelming. The showy black-eyed Susan ended up down in the bottom of the rain garden. In fact, ended up all over, and I ended up, pulling out some of it just to control it. The juncus didn't seem to be happy. It wasn't wet enough for the juncus. It's common rush is a lovely plant that is kind of very structural and vase-shaped, kind of more an architectural feature, an evergreen feature in a garden. The brown fox sedge lasted and did okay. The palm sedge did okay. The spirabolus did okay. The tufted hairgrass, which was supposed to like a moist area, eventually died back. And again, this Rudbeckia triloba, I was constantly pulling out everywhere. So the dry plants that I used in that upper area, either around the edge of the rain garden or into the larger planting area behind the rain garden, all did well. The heuchera did well kind of next to the rain garden, as did the Amsonia was up kind of near the house. That did well. I've had trouble in the past, I will say, trying to grow butterfly weed, but I planted, it took me 2 plantings because I thought where I have all of the gravel and sand from that patio would be a perfect place for butterfly weed. And it did finally take, so that was very good. The coreopsis, the sand coreopsis did well around the edge of the rain garden. And the other plants just kind of did well out in the garden, and I was slowly adding to those. One that you might wonder, why didn't I plant it in my rain garden, is Zizia aurea, golden Alexanders, which like a moister soil. I had planted Zizia in my front garden, and I found it was just too aggressive. It just went everywhere. So like brown-eyed Susan, I didn't want to plant that. In terms of shrubs, I didn't put anything actually in the rain garden. So these are pictures of the rain garden as it ended up looking. This is in the spring. Here you can see prairie drop seed. This is actually in a drier area, because what ended up happening is the upland garden kind of just merged into the drier garden. This is looking from the house back over the rain garden. You can see here prairie smoke, and you would wonder, why would that be in the rain garden? Well, it wasn't. It was on the upper edge of the rain garden. This is looking back to the bluestone patio. And this is looking from the edge of the rain garden back toward the downspout. And you can see some of the penstemon and iris doing well here in the spring. The other thing that came down into the rain garden was Joe Pyeweed, which I had planted in the back fence and along the back fence, and that started to come into both areas of the garden as well. And then this is just a picture showing it with water. And you would think, I was wondering about things like the penstemon and the prairie drop seed, which wouldn't normally be something that would handle this kind of water, but it seemed to handle it fine, particularly because it really did soak in after about 24 hours. So to just go, are there any questions, Jean, about my rain garden?
Yeah, I don't see questions at this point. So
Okay.
I know you
Okay.
wanted to give a couple resources, and we should probably narrow that down to the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
So let me, I will, rather than show you the resources on the slide, let me show you. So there are 2, I'll do these real quickly. These are, one of the handouts that I've prepared is all of the rain garden resources. You'll be getting this, that you can go to give you kind of, if you want to read more detailed information about how to do a rain garden. And a lot of these, first of all, Northern Kane County may not have that kind of resource, but there are so many knowledgeable people in Wild Ones that can really help you. So if you're not already a member, I suggest you join. Chicago Botanic Garden actually has a demonstration rain garden that you can go to. A good plant list and information on the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Rain Garden Network has some packets of information that they'll send to you for a small fee. It's not very extensive, but there's a lot of information on some of these other websites before you pay. Wisconsin has a great resource. Conservation Foundation has information about rain gardens, and also has a link to some of these other resources. The Missouri Botanic Garden, although it's Missouri and not Illinois, has a wonderful website about rain gardens. They call it rainscaping. And in the plants that they recommend there, many of the plants, if not all of them, are native to Illinois as well. And I would just make sure that you purchase plants that are native to Illinois. So you can look at any of the plants that they recommend. They've got some good lists. They've got some nice, some nice how-to instructions as well. Wild Ones National is another one just for native plant resources. Maplewood has lots of great information, and Blue Thumb has some nice videos for rain gardens. Then the other thing that I did was I put together a plant list that are plants that I have used in my own garden, in my own rain garden, that I thought might be good. I have selected these because they're lower, they're well growing, they don't seem to spread that much. So there's a drier upper zone sheet, and there is also a moist bottom zone sheet. So you can kind of take these and start to work with them, and some of it's all an experiment. You just kind of have to get in there and start doing it and start planting. So with that, I'll say just thank you very much. I hope these are helpful, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions before we go off and enjoy our Saturdays.
Yeah, well, Mary Alice just tossed in a great observation, and that was that buttonbush especially likes to have its feet wet, and
Yes.
I have had one by mine. We've got several out at Hawthorne Hills where there's a shoreline, and we put them close to the shoreline. So yeah.
And Hawthorne Hills, I'm glad you mentioned Hawthorne Hills, Jean. That's a great demonstration garden area that Wild Ones has done, and is a great place to go visit to learn more about native plants.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Trish, we can't thank you enough for traveling all the way from Pittsburgh today. And
it was my pleasure.
I could listen to you all day. I really enjoy your presentations. So
thank you, Jean.
Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you to Gale Borden Library for being our partner on this. And we're getting lots of comments saying thank you for a wonderful presentation.
That's great.
So with that,
that's great. Good luck and have fun with it.
Happy gardening. I'm going to go out in the garden today.
Okay.